Awesome. Okay, well, I'm sure we're going to have some people kind of trickle in here as we do the introduction, but that's okay. I want to get going and be respectful of people's time. So yeah, really thanks to everyone who joined for the morning session. And if you're just joining us now, welcome. If you missed the morning session, I thought it was an amazing conversation, and there's so much to learn about kind of how we can reimagine and think about governance in different ways, and the implications that that can have for our ways of working and our roles within organizations. And I'm just excited to kind of move forward with these changes and this work and try to make things better for people working in the arts. So this afternoon, we are joined by some wonderful folks. Holly Aubichon is going to lead our panel discussion, Sâkitawâhk, Where Rivers Meet, Collaborations, Individuals, and Decolonizing the Arts. And she's going to be joined by Adrienne Huard and Dayna Danger, and I'm so excited to have them on the panel, and I'm going to now just pass it right off to Holly. Oh, sorry, I should mention that we are, like the morning, we're going to take a short break kind of around 2:25, so I'll be keeping my eye on that. And yeah, take it away, Holly. Thank you.
Sanche, Ishinikishin, Holly Aubichon, Nia Métis, Sâkêwêwak, and Settler, Maparante Se Aubichon, La Liberty, Desimi, and Morin, Regina Doshin, Meadow Lake, Green Lake, Lestock, Saskatchewan, Ni Fami, Regina, Newikin. So I was speaking Michif. I'm learning and challenging myself to say it in public. I said, hello, my name is Holly Aubichon. My pronouns are she, her. I am Métis, Sâkêwêwak, which is Cree, and Settler, Ukrainian, Irish, and Scottish. My relations are Aubichon, Desimi, La Liberty, and Morin. I'm from Regina, but my family is from Meadow Lake, Green Lake, and Lestock, Saskatchewan, and I live in Regina. I am the artistic director at Sâkêwêwak Artist Collective. I've been here since July 2021. And if you're unfamiliar with Sâkêwêwak, they've incorporated in 1996 and have been supporting Indigenous artists in Regina and surrounding communities since. Our mandate is to ensure that Indigenous artists within these areas are consistently being provided with a space and environment that allows them to develop their self-determined practices while having critical exchanges with their peers and audiences. Some regular programming looks like our annual Storytellers Festival, and that's where Dayna and Adrienne participated with us recently. Also annual residencies, new funding we just received acknowledgement of today for an annual professional development series, so that'll continue on, and exhibitions and pop-up engagements as well. I'm going to give just a brief introduction of Dayna and Adrienne, and feel free to expand on whatever you want before you answer the first question. But Dayna and Adrienne both have pronouns they, them, and they both identify as two-spirit. Dayna uses terminology like indigiqueer, acknowledging their Métis, Soto, Polish background as well. Visual artist, high tanner, drummer, bead worker, karaoke superstar, I think. And their practice is an act of reclaiming space and power over society's projections of sexualities and representation. I just got a notification my Wi-Fi seems unstable. If you can't hear me or need me to repeat myself, just someone wave or message me. And then Adrienne identifies as a Anishinaabe person. They do curation, writing, and they're a scholar and performer as well. Born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba. They also currently sit on a Two-Spirit board for Manitoba, for Two-Spirit Manitoba. And both of them are enrolled in PhD level programming of Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba for Adrienne, and then Concordia for Dayna. And in part, that was an important reason in inviting them to this conversation. In the morning, we kind of talked about language and using simple language. So we will continue to use that here. And I think one of the benefits of having these two individuals here who have that level of experience is also their work and their career up until this point and continuing forward, I think also tries to decolonize those spaces as well by using different languages and things like that. So yeah, really excited that they both agreed to have this conversation. We're going to be opening up a lot about experiences that are lived from each one of us. And so when you're asking questions, please be mindful that these are real experiences that we're deciding to share as a way to move towards action on decolonizing the arts. And so I just wanted to make that known to everyone, to be cautious of the way you ask questions because they are personal. And to withhold from maybe asking those personal questions during our initial discussion and asking questions towards them in the Q&A section after our break. However, when I'm asking questions, there'll be 4 kind of themed questions for Dayna and Adrienne. I really encourage you to have a paper in front of you and have the mindset of imagining like a project that you may be working on, or maybe you manage staff for that project, and write down any thoughts that you had about your own past experiences related to that question. At the end, what I'm really hoping to do is have these 4 points conceptualize this one act of decolonizing that we can all do together, and that we can all also actually do as soon as tomorrow. And so I want to just put that in your minds while you're listening, and we can begin. I'm going to just give a brief rundown of what Storytellers is and how it existed for this last season. So Sâkitawâhk was the title of the festival, and it brought together 14 artists in total, ranging from emerging to established. We are often thinking about having a prairie focus, being in Saskatchewan and feeling most related to Alberta and Manitoba, but have extended out a little bit, but just wanted to note that focus in our programming. We had First Nations and Métis artists supported throughout the festival, and included 2 non-Indigenous dancers who are people of color and often excluded in spaces. That's a dynamic that we're trying to maintain within our programming for those shared peer exchanges and learning. And then what even was Storytellers? It's not just a typical, sit around in a circle and tell stories. We're really trying to think about ways that can exist in a modern form with modern Indigenous people and new ideas or reinvented ones. So there was dance, experimental performances, theatrical performances. On another night, there was a drag show with a drag king and a drag queen, as well as a social with a dance party. In addition to those evening activities where storytelling was happening in that multidisciplinary form, we had a workshop around beading hosted by Dayna and Catherine Boyer. And then we also had a film screening supporting Two-Spirit or gender based films for family audiences, but with the kind of intention for children as well. And I wanted to say that all because a part of this conversation, and I think important to speak to some evidence of how these actions can be done, is to showcase that this happened, sold out tickets for both nights, full attendance in our screening and our workshop. And it was done by someone who had no experience hosting a festival or facilitating, staff and things like that. And that, I believe, and I'm going to be speaking with Dayna and Adrienne today, is because of our relationship building that happens while building projects and collaborations. And there's a lot of time and energy that's put, before the festival actually happens. And as someone who was previously not experienced, it was really challenging, but also exciting to basically follow the rules, like this morning's, conversations of like, this is the change we need. And I was in a space to just take that change and trial it. And so this conversation is a reflection on how it happened, the successes of it, and where it can translate to everybody, and not just my individual experience or Dayna's and Adrienne's individual experiences. And with that, our first theme is looking at an evaluation of collaborative efforts. So Dayna or Adrienne, either of you can just jump in and then pass it off to the other person when they're done. But I wanted to ask, why did you decide to participate in Storytellers? And if there were any influences in the pre-festival planning that supported you or took away from your hoped performance?
Cool. You know what? I guess I will start because that kind of naturally goes into the flow of like how, me and Adrienne came to be there. But from my understanding is like I was asked to be a part of it. Throwing shit around already. I was asked to be a part of this festival, but it was interesting because it was in a capacity of hosting, and that was something that I had actually like always wanted to kind of do, but never had really been given the opportunity. As a visual artist, I'm often put in like performance places or stuff like that, and it was I had been asked to host things before, so I feel like, okay, maybe this is the right time. And many of the reasons for that being the right time, or that I felt like I could want to do that or express that, was also because like I had met Holly previously, like months and months before, at a gathering that had happened in Ottawa through oh my God, great. All the names are leaving me now. We came together to essentially make these like amazing AI robots, or not robots, but like use the AI robots to make art. And I think through like wanting to see more Indigenous content, out there, or what does the robot know about us? Like there became like so much laughter and hilarity and like a lot of these kind of like laughing aunties that I just really vibed with. And then I was like, okay, who is Holly? I want to know who this person is. And then also when I've been around, I was originally on what is now known as the Indigenous Curatorial Collective. I was on the board 2013. So I have over 10 years of experience of being on these boards and stuff like that. And so when you come to these when you're invited to sort of these events, you're always looking at the people, you know what I mean? For me, especially as an individual, I want to go to places, like I want to say yes to things where maybe there's already a pre-established relationship. I kind of know what I'm getting into. For me, it's like any sort of introduction, when we introduce ourselves, we're trying to situate who we are we related, all those like fun, all those good things. But then also beyond that, it's like, what if I had been if I had talked to an arts organization before, or if I knew about the history before, or who's in that position now. So what I mean by that is like, who's kind of running the space now, as these organizations, they change and they evolve. And with that, so do our relationships. So it kind of just felt like this really wonderful aligning. And also to think of something like that happening in Regina, I really wanted to be a part of that. And so from my experience after that, I don't know, I felt like emboldened, or like I felt like I really wanted, I was like, you know who else would be really cool to see at this festival is like my really good friend Adrienne, because of the drag aspect. Like immediately I was just like thinking about that, and like Winnipeg, Regina, and also thinking about locality. Like there is a lot of focus at this local space, but then also bringing in people to kind of help almost inspire, because I also look, being here, we're coming to you from Jojage, or so-called Montreal. So I've been out east now for the past 10 years and really missed the programming and the way, and I already know the way that things work in the prairies in terms of like how we gather. And so already that was like, there was a lot of ticks for me in terms of like, for me wanting to do something out of my box, feeling comfortable to do that, and also feeling comfortable enough to want to bring in people too that I love and trust, that I think would add to it in a good way. And then also that feedback was received in like such a positive way too, and things like that. So that's kind of a little bit about, for me, about the invitation and what goes on behind it. And subsequently, sometimes we're not taught to ask for things. Like whatever the ask is of the institution is what we get, but actually that there is actually a reciprocity that needs to happen, that artists could feel emboldened, but sometimes we're often not told to, or that those sort of like with the places that are organizing or whatever, they kind of hold a lot of that power. And so it's also like, how do we hold people when we're inviting them too? Like, do I know that I'm going to be taken care of? Like all of these things I'm thinking about before I ask to be a part of something. That's what I have to say.
Okay.
For now.
Yeah, you'll have to excuse my voice. I'm in my sexy jazz era, but I also have lost my voice. I had the pleasure of performing at an after party for the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association conference this past Saturday. So I did actually a pole dance performance, and then sure enough, like the next day there's like burlesque, there's drag that day anyway, and so much wooing that I woke up the next day and I've lost my voice since. So it probably doesn't help that I smoked a pack of cigarettes. We're not going to talk about it. What we are going to talk about is yeah, I was really lucky to have Dayna invite me into the Storytellers Festival, because we're kin, and I know that Dayna is also very careful about who they invite into these spaces, and I know that Dayna carries that responsibility with the utmost integrity. And so I think that trust that we already knew that I could trust Dayna going into this space, and in a good way. What was incredible was that I was invited to do drag, and usually I feel like I'm invited to do like curating or some sort of other arts discussion. And so my drag character it's actually relatively new. I've only been doing drag for a year now, and so I was almost surprised. I was like, are you sure it's for drag, right? We're talking about here, and so it's an interesting opportunity to bring my drag into these spaces, whereas usually I'm used to having them more in, say, queer bars in Winnipeg, and more kind of I guess inclusive spaces, I guess, are more exclusive. Anyway, but I guess for me, I often think about my drag as also a form of storytelling, and a lot of my research, I talk about two-spirit drag as and burlesque as a form of transmitting our knowledges too, because dance, music, drum theater, like you think of any of our art, our visual culture, creativity is a form of our knowledges as well. So why can't two-spirit drag also be a form of telling our stories and passing those teachings on as well? So I felt really honored to come into this space and to be able to do that. And Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Thank you for both sharing. I wanted to also kind of speak on that as the organization person, receiving, like Dayna said, having the opportunity to vocalize what, you might need or want. Sorry, I keep getting a phone call. Sorry. Bringing the suggestion over of inviting another person, something that even as organizational bodies isn't what everybody's used to, and may question on why are they wanting to bring this person in? Where is the relation to the project that we're hosting? And right away, it was like, what a gesture it felt like for Dayna to make a suggestion, because with it being a festival trying to support Two-Spirit identities and expression without the controls that are often placed on Two-Spirit folks in institutions, drag not always being the place that art spaces are going to host, because some people may have conflicts within their rules of systems or methodologies to make things like family appropriate and things like that. But for us as an Indigenous space, recognizing that Two-Spirit people have their own role in community and their own powers, abilities, concepts, that I, as not identifying as a Two-Spirit person, felt like it was like a gesture of knowledge being brought here and being shared in the prairies. And the collaborations in terms of relationship, it didn't just exist as a relationship with Dayna, who's in relationship with Adrienne. It was the minute that Adrienne was brought and mentioned, we've confirmed that this person is of interest, of getting to know. There was communications and relationship building with Adrienne separately. And I think that's something really important to just acknowledge when you're thinking of collaborating with people, or you're getting suggested ideas, things like that, of considering how those offers have alternative knowledge or methodologies that could really highlight the theme of what you're trying to achieve, not just within Two-Spirit spaces, but in all sorts of spaces. Indigenous methodologies, separate from gender and identity in those roles, also have space for that. I will move on to the next question unless anyone has any comments. We're good. So after just taking that quick evaluation of collaborations and initial relationships and how they come to be, it brings us to the point of asking that question, collaborations and decolonizing the arts, where are those, where do those come together? Why does collaborations, affect the systems to support decolonizing? And that collaboration, I think, carries straight to methodologies. When you're collaborating with someone else, like an Indigenous person, trying to have that understanding of their methodologies, not so much how your methodologies will serve them, how you're handed the contract and it's given all these orders and ways of understanding knowledge. Whereas we believe that through collaborations, before that contract hits the table, you have that built trust, that build understanding of the person, and that the contract can be written for the relationship, not just a standard template. There was a term brought up earlier this morning with Taryn or Jordan, I can't remember who said it, but it was working at the speed of trust. And that's something that was repeated this morning that I want to kind of fit into this question while you're reflecting and thinking about Adrienne and Dayna's experiences and what they've shared. So I guess I want to ask that question to you, Dayna and Adrienne. How would a relationship between the artist and organization support the efforts of decolonizing the arts for you, or maybe just sharing an experience of when you felt, you know, there was a step forward in decolonizing. Yeah.
I feel like most like, because being on the board of the Indigenous Curatorial Collective back in the day, we did do a lot of colloquiums where we brought many different like people together. I don't know why the hell I brought that up. My brain I just lost the thought already. I think it's an interesting one because, oh yeah, there goes the buffaloes already. Just losing my earrings, just getting all hot and bothered by this question right now. Oh, how can we be supported? Hard, man. I mean, ways in which I've seen, like, I felt really good and respected, like based, like it's almost like when you're inviting somebody, it's like really understanding what those obstacles, like what is it for that person to get to your to your front door, to your event, you know, as an like I used to do a lot of organizing in the past as well, a lot of activism organizing, and I think that even simple things like I'll even just say the simplest thing of just like, even if you know Two-Spirit people, or if you know like queer people, many of us do not like to go to things alone. Like, especially Two-Spirit people, if you want Two-Spirit people to come to your events and things like that, there's got to be a +1, or they got to bring a buddy, they got to bring somebody like that's there, like somebody that's a support. Because it's really daunting going to a lot of these things alone for the first time, especially if in your respective community, wherever that may be, especially out in the prairies. You know, it's hard to know if it's going to be a safe place or not. Are you going to face racism? Are you going to face stuff about your sexuality? Are you know, we have to make a lot of those decisions sometimes before we go to these events, and so, or those sort of things, or even to participate in them. I remember even being at the event, and being dressed in drag, and then people wanted to go out after, and I was like, you know what? I actually don't feel comfortable going to a bar dressed like in male drag, like, or my idea of like whatever a male would be, whatever a man would be, an uncle, you know. Maybe the Regina bars actually need Danger as an uncle there, but I had never been there. I've never been to any of those events, so I don't even know what it's like. Like, I felt like at the Storytellers Festival, we had made like this space that just like defied time, defied space, defied all the history and all the colonial bullshit, and we just had like joy, like just pure, unadulterated like joy, where we could just exist. And we were all like, people were dancing fully masked, like most of people were masked at that event, and like that really showed me, because we had elders there, we had like, it was very intergenerational. Even like the young kids, a lot of the younger kids, I mean, even the younger ones did stick around to the dance party, you know. And I was out there dancing with my binder and whatnot, but I would not say that anything like that was like, everything felt like people were watching out, people were looking and taking care of each other. And like, to see that at an event, like through, you know, those places, you don't always feel that, but those are the places that we're always trying to make, especially gathering spaces. This is the time when we do all that, when we share all those spaces. So to have a conversation like this, where it's actually talking about these points rather than talking around stuff or talking about concepts of stuff, you know, that to me is like part of the decolonizing of it. Let's be transparent about what our experiences actually are and who we're actually trying to serve in these different events that we even do.
And even like when I think about the Storyteller Festival, I mean, I think it might have been one of the safest gatherings, and I think it's certainly because Two-Spirit people were made central, and I think the number of us gathering was a matter of safety, and I think survival for many of us on the prairies who, you know, we do face a lot of racism, and even I see in the notes here, or the comments here, toxic masculinity, like that's certainly something that's very apparent in Winnipeg. So to have something Yeah, and disabled. Yes, exactly.
Oh, the accessibility. Oh my God. I can't even get it. Like organizations and their accessibility is like centuries behind. And being in Montreal, the worst place where everyone's like, let's fill some concrete into the slope and that will be enough for you know.
Yeah, no kidding.
Most of our event, like organizing, I was like, oh, I found this amazing place. Like everyone could feel safe. There was a whole flight of stairs. Like it was like on the 3rd floor. So I was like, oh, what are we just going to carry people up? Is that an actual option? Like that's so dehumanizing. Like you're just wanting to have sexy fun times or like just have fun times, period. And you can't even because we sometimes don't even reach out of ourselves. We're so in like our own experience that to not even fathom what somebody else might have to, like what are the other obstacles to get to the door, like things like bus tickets, even like shit like that, thinking about class, like who is not coming to your door. Like I won't host events at universities if I'm wanting to like work with the houseless population, because the houseless population is so policed at these institutions to begin with. They're like immediately kicked out. They don't even belong. They're not even welcome there. So like they're just seen as nuisance or a problem downtown versus why would I have an event there? Like I know that a certain class bracket will just be policed right away. Even if I say it's safe to come, I don't control security there. Security has its own mandates. So these are just things that I often think about when I'm organizing, or even when I'm going to be somewhere or go somewhere. Try to even do all that research. We have to do so much research to even know if it's like okay.
And I guess like one thing that Dayna, you mentioned earlier about it being like intergenerational, and I think such a foundational moment that happened during the Storyteller Festival is that we had a friend whose child came out as Two-Spirit, and I think they must have been, they're 11? No, they're 9, right?
Who?
They're young. I'll share.
Okay, yeah. Like we're trying to be discreet.
Discreet.
Yeah, the children, yeah.
But so this kid came out as was out as Two-Spirit, non-binary, and
oh yeah, okay, sorry, duh. Okay,
yeah. They latched onto us the whole weekend. They saw us as a couple of safe people, and in fact, they're saying like, I want to dress up in drag for that one drag evening too. And we kind of took them under our wing.
We went shopping. We were like picking out outfits,
and I think that's just something that I think the Storyteller Festival, I think it really like gave us space to do that. And so I remember at the end of the events is that their mom, they're saying like we're at this age now where we're stepping into these roles of auntie, uncle, auntie, you name it. And I think for at least me personally, it was my first experience of having a nibbling, and also being 35, I'm like, I'm still a kid. Like, how is this possible that we're stepping into these roles? But it's interesting to kind of come into these new responsibilities and to see these generations coming forward and coming into these spaces and feeling safe to express themselves. It's kind of like a really beautiful thing.
I really resonate with this idea of not wanting to grow up, because in a way, like a lot of stuff had to be secret and had to be repressed or not talked about. So when I see, like, I can't even imagine, like, here's a young person telling me that they see themselves this way, and then I immediately want to go and squash that. Like, that's why I never told anyone about it. Like, I knew this word that, like, what was it at the time? My bisexual. Like, I didn't even know how to like articulate to my Roman Catholic Polish upbringing. How do I even exist to them? Because I'm damned. Like, if I do, damned if I don't. Either way, it doesn't matter if I even go to church. I'm done. I'm done for. It doesn't matter. So it's like those kind of things, you know what I mean? That it really showed me like what I would not want done to, like, I'm thinking about, and I was like, it's sorry, there's just so many, I'm thinking about the future, I'm thinking about the past, I'm thinking about the lack of Two-Spirit elders that not that they weren't there, but the lack of connection we had to like finding each other intergenerationally, because we had to be so secret all the time. And it's like, if you know, it's like if somebody tells you, and especially we didn't have the internet back then. So back in those days when it was a 56K modem and, your mom's trying to call somebody, but you just want to chat to your friends. Yeah, that's all we had. That's all we had. And so we're not even conceptualizing these things. Now there's so much information to conceptualize. It's amazing. But then how does somebody guided through that information and all that knowledge and that history? Because it hasn't always been accessible. And then we're going to be we're already uncles, aunties, uncles, whatever, parents, we're stepping into those roles right now. And I think that's at a benefit. Two-Spirit people for sure. Like, it's just like, there's just so much joy that we want to share with those young ones. And I can see why those were revered roles for a lot of us. This is generalization too, okay? So like, not everyone, okay, we know not everyone. Don't say all Indigenous people, okay? But just to say that, like, from what I understand from my teachings, like, it makes a lot of sense. Like, when I see it in action, even doing this, I hosted a hike camp recently, and we put women and Two-Spirit people are at the center of everything that we do. And we were around elders, we were around people that respected our pronouns and stuff like that, because it took us, like, since 2019, like 5 years. So when we say at the speed of trust, like, years and years and years, 5 years till we actually had what we thought was like an actual good event. We had our harm reduction people there, we had our elders there, and we still have so much more to learn. So those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess lastly, when I think about like methodologies, and when I think about, I guess, like, I'm always coming back to this event, but you could really tell that, like, when I think about collaboration, I think that in itself is an Indigenous methodology, and that like Western ideology is so fixated on fame and individuality, right? And so, it's like the scarcity mentality. It's kind of like we're undoing that within, in these late stages of capitalism. So to kind of come together and I never thought that we would like do a drag show together. And then you know what I mean? Like, we're so lucky. And
yeah, it's amazing to be. I've never dressed in drag before, but it's because of your bravery to do that. No, honestly, because it is, like, there's not a lot of like that other side of, there's like, especially in the drag scene, there's a lot of play with femininity, but there is, I think, masculinity is I'm also afraid to play with it because it is so toxic, and I'm like, wow, it's so easy to like reproduce. It's actually quite lazy. It takes a lot of work to not reproduce those toxic things, because they're just so ingrained in us. And understanding that, like, having to unlearn that from what I know of, like, what I'm willing to accept before and what I'm not willing to accept anymore. Oh, and also there's this really good question. Do you ever work with the access issues of organizing when this is a time where we are opening spaces to be respectful and lift shame from things like alcohols and drugs? Yes, but at the same time, other folks like assault survivors or people who survive addiction can often be triggered by these spaces with these substances. Oh my God, yeah, that's a huge one that I'm always grappling with. And I think that I don't have a definitive answer because it's not black and white. It can't be like yes or no. Whereas like at my camp, we don't tolerate drinking because we understand that the moose, that we're honoring the spirit of that moose. And so our focus becomes on that and not on things that can maybe take our focus away, is what I'm kind of like, how I try to frame it, because it's more of like I've become a huge stoner since the pandemic. And I used to be really ashamed of that. And actually by doing that shame, it just became, I would pathologize it more and became more like, kind of really was like, oh, I'm impure, I'm unclean, I can't touch my drums, I can't touch my medicine, and actually was harming myself being so much like that. And so I wanted to leave space to be those nuances where we can actually start to play with those, not play, but like have support people there. If we know that our I don't know, sectors of society or whatever are affected by oppression in these ways, then we should have supports there for when people get triggered, because, you know, we're not going to stop making porn or doing doing stripping and all that sort of stuff just because people get triggered by it. We need to be able to understand why people are triggered by this and how to safely carry them through those experiences. Like, we just want, ultimately, we need to be caring for those, the care needs to be there, and we talk about that a lot. But actually, do people actually know how to de-escalate a mental health situation? Do people actually know how to de-escalate when somebody gets triggered? Do we know how to hold space for people when they're when that happens? You could easily, drugs or alcohol or anything else. I knew somebody that was triggered by the curtains that I had in the shelter that I lived at, because they reminded me of the place where they were assaulted before. And these are things that are sometimes out of your control, is what I'm trying to say. But how do we make it safer for people then? How, as organizers, we should or we could, maybe should is the wrong word. But we could be thinking about those, because that's I think the more care we put in, you know, and if people are like, oh, it's just so much work to do all of that, but then why are you even doing this then? I don't want to go to an event where I'm going to get severely triggered and then leave and have to take care of myself after or whatever. I'm listen, I can get I one of my mentors is a roadkill queen. I can get down with some disgusting shit, okay? And in all forms. If you see my art, that's only the iceberg top, honey. There's so much that I don't even show you because I don't think people are ready, but it's okay.
I've seen it.
But also to speak to our relationship, even we talk a lot about photographer and muse or things like that, those kind of those dynamics, and we lean into them. I even got you a shirt that said muse or something, and where I was really honoring what that meant for somebody to be inspired by somebody, by their likeness, and how do we honor that person, and how do we build that trusting relationship where we can talk through things about ownership, or I'm an artist, but the images of Adrienne, who really owns it? Well, we both do, actually, because without Adrienne, there is no photo, there is no likeness, but without me, there is no photo as well. So it is the coming of us together in that trusting relationship that we I'm in that trusting relationship, right? Sorry, that's just our dynamic.
Yeah. No, but it's definitely it's a constant process of consent and negotiating what that consent looks like, right? It's not just this linear idea of what that looks. It's an ongoing relationship, an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you both for sharing those. It brought up a lot of points that I think are examples of points kind of discussed earlier, but also just thinking about all of the barriers you were naming in your experiences. So it can be things that are unexpected barriers because they're so personal and they happen in those moments. And you're saying it's important for spaces to have those supports, trained support, just to be able to recognize when somebody's being affected by the programming unintentionally or intentionally. But I really want to hammer home that idea of if you take the responsibility of visiting with your artist that you're collaborating with, just visiting, no transactional, engagements in your first meeting or in your first 3 meetings, because these stories, these personal experiences, these kind of warnings of I need these securities in order to participate. All of those things will come out very naturally. I truly believe that from my experiences, from the ones that Dayna and Adrienne have given for themselves, that taking that time to know the artist that you're inviting in, or the collaborator who may not be in a visual form in that way, but maybe they're consulting, or maybe you're trying to reach out to another organization for support or for direction. And especially when it comes to people who are underserved, we're focusing on Indigenous experiences just from our own backgrounds, but it also very much touches on other people who have similar feelings of fear and neglect in collaborative, presentations. And I didn't know that there was someone who participated who had, they felt seen, and they had this new identity to claim to, or just this discovered, like internally discovered identity. Yeah, and that's the goal of what we're doing in our roles. It's not the goal for me to try to, make sure every seat is full so that I can report that on CADAC. That's not what we're doing here, So it's all of our responsibility to make sure that we're tasking ourselves to getting to know each other as friends, as support systems. And those, Dayna said it really well. I don't know what example you gave, but it was such a strong support for Indigenous methodologies. We just visit all the tea, all the information you want, the friendship you could have with an individual just through a casual visiting situation where you're not asking them to supply you with things or educate you on a certain topic. Because that education will happen through your trust and relationship with that person. And even if that relationship exists, for 3 months at its prime, and then you're kind of bouncing in and out of each other's lives online or through other engaging programming, knowing that that is valuable, and that distance, that separation, all of that are important keys to forming, I think, supportive environments all around, because once artists experience that, especially underserved artists, they're going to want to work with those people again, and they're going to bring their friends and their family and their kin. And that's literally what I think decolonizing is like in these spaces, is that safety and security. If you're looking for some tangible resources on why, we're vocalizing this as such an importance, is we've been organizations across Canada through granting bodies, as well as through calls of action through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, are all naming really clear examples of where our supports haven't been and where they need to be met. And I'm sure everyone in this room, can name a few that they've talked about within their organizations, and reflect on whether or not you've achieved, something to the level of relationship with an Indigenous group of people. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. There's a few articles. I'm just going to name those articles right now for you to note, and I'll just discuss one, I think. So Article 11.1 is the right to practice and revitalize cultural traditions and customs. This includes past, present, and future ceremonies, technologies, visual, performing arts, literature. And the point 2 of that, so states shall provide redress through effective mechanisms which may include restitution developed in conjunction with Indigenous peoples with respect to their cultural, intellectual, religious, and spiritual property, taken without their free, prior, or informed consent, or in violation of their laws, traditions, or customs. Article 15.1, the right to dignity and diversity of their cultures, traditions, histories, and aspirations, which to be reflected in education and public information. 15.2, just furthering that point. And then Article 20.1 and point 2, they have the right to maintain their political, economic, social systems or institutions to secure in the enjoyment of their own means of subsistence and development, freely engage in all their traditional and economic activities. And then Article 34, the right to promote, develop, and maintain institutional structures. and their distinctive customs, spirituality, traditions, procedures, and practices. So I wanted to share those just for you to note and reflect on later, because they can touch on a lot of spaces for a lot of organizations, but they're really, to summarize, capturing this idea that Indigenous methodologies within your spaces should be active practices today. And that's as simple as going to visit with someone in a non-transactional form. And I think that the points that you're obtaining, to make them applied as a practice in your employment so that your colleagues are doing it, or maybe you're a manager of those spaces and you're tasking down and for yourself of looking at some of these points and, dedicating to your work plan or your staff's work plan. Maybe it is setting 5 hours of mandatory visiting, where you get to, work on your statistical reporting that you have to do every, month. You have to do your admin, you have to do maybe in a programming engagement. But if you also had to have a visit, 5 hours worth of it, or whatever you could name, where capacity was just taking that break to meet someone and be their support or be supported like in a friendship manner. We try to do this with Sâkêwêwak and what's downtown just by like throwing invitations for luncheons or things like that aren't structured by anything other than we all are 3 to 5 blocks away from each other. Where are my friends in this professional and like task form? And I think, with that movement happening, we'll all be able to have friendship in a way that doesn't feel transactional, or that if you are someone who's underserved, but you now are being one of the key people to receive funding, like you need to care for those people in a way that's non-transactional as well. Sorry, I'm missing a lot of these comments.
No, I'm loving what you're saying, Holly, but then I'm also like brewing my head. I'm like, wait, I have more things about these sober spaces, because as a big drum carrier in that, I think about this a lot in terms of harm reduction and like the sort of spaces. So I was just like putting different comments about like ways that I would like look around that, like even an art event, like I made it so that the art event, we didn't serve alcohol for the first couple of hours. And then once the big drum and the people that, well, it was more protocols of ceremony, but I mean, like, that's something that I asked for. I was like, I wanted to have the big drum. I wanted to honor my first solo at Urban Shaman. And I was really lucky because Urban Shaman was like really sensitive to understanding ceremonial protocols where, that's something that we asked. But I'm like, it's an art opening, so of course people are going to want to drink wine and stuff like that. But then I was like, well, this is the compromise. The first couple at the beginning, we started this way, and then once the drum is gone, then you can leave, and then the rest of the night, then they started serving alcohol. So that's kind of like how we broke it up for things like that.
Thanks. We'll also have, I think, these comments or whatever like information to draw from later, probably summarized. So if you keep chatting but you don't want to speak on it right away, that's totally fine. I'll just let that be. I did want to move on to a next section for timing. So this theme is alternative methodologies. And I guess because I've named an alternative methodology being visiting as like a core concept to achieve your goals, I also wanted to talk about maybe examples or hear from Dayna and Adrienne where common practice or like best practices that aren't actually named, like they're not legally what you have to do, it's just kind of status quo. If there's an example in naming or not naming that you can share, like the common practice interrupted what you had intended to do. And I want to ask this because it is something that I think most people experience when they're not familiar with the background or the structure of these institutions and spaces. And it's because common practice is so easily thrown around. As an administrator, I've seen it before, where I kind of question, like, I learned from this place in my training days, but this way did it this way, you know, who named that common practice? Why are they existing in this way? And why are they being applied to these relationships? Where's the benefit? Where's the commonality to that practice and this relationship, kind of? And so I would like to hear that, just so everyone also can hear an example of where, even in their own spaces, they may have made those mistakes. Although, you know, calling yourself an ally and acknowledging yourself in these ways, you can still make mistakes, or not realize a mistake was being made by, or not necessarily a mistake, but just some like accidental harm by the way we practice colonial methodologies, and then doing the reconciliation to take on Indigenous methodologies. I'll repeat the question again if you need, unless you're ready to go. So just to, if you feel comfortable naming an experience where a common practice or status quo kind of structure had a negative effect on your presentation. And then I guess if you don't want to name a negative like situation, you could also name a positive one where someone stepped away from their common practice. It's up to you.
Okay, well, I have two then, because I have a negative and then I have a positive, actually. So the negative experience, I'll talk openly about it because I don't give a fuck. But it's also it's because of specifically what's going on here in Quebec too. It's like I remember being on the board of what was called the AC. I always want to call it the ACC, but it's like the ICC. But when I was on the board, we were working with this group called it was called BACA, and it's usually the biennial, the Indigenous biennial that happens here every 2 years, through specifically this commercial gallery called Art Mirror. But they also kind of dabble in, they're really interesting in some ways because they are not your typical commercial gallery. They do apply for a lot of arts funding. And I mean, nobody else is really doing a biennial here. So there's that. So like you know what I mean? When you're given scraps, there's only so much. But I remember just hearing what, like, at the end of it all, like, we no longer, as the Indigenous Curatorial Collective, we no longer wanted to be associated with them because they literally would not listen to any recommendations that we made. They treated our curators like absolute shit. Like, these are two young, they were two young women. One was a mom, and they were making them pay out of pocket for like the basic materials to hang things, you know, to actually make your show go up and shit like that. And it was just tireless conversations where they knew better than apparently we did, you know. And you will see this a lot too, like some people, you know, people that especially that want to work with Indigenous peoples that are non-Indigenous, like that was like it was a very obvious, like, I'm like, how many Indigenous people have you actually been around versus how many you represented? Because let me tell you, your representation is not going to tell you that. They want you to still work for them and make money, but they're not going to tell you what a bunch of shitheads you are. So that's our job, and we did, and they didn't listen. And so we removed ourselves from that, because ultimately, and also, like, when you're working with like an advisory, or like you're working with an Indigenous organization, and you just go ahead and like print like the books that we're supposed to be collaborating with, like all French first, no talking, no checking in with anybody about the languages. Like, we're like, well, maybe Haudenosaunee or Anishinaabe, because those are actually the languages here, but no. And then, you know, like things like that, like just total gross, like status quo. We never do this, but we haven't done that before. We're not going to start doing it now. And we're actually like, no, we're asking you for these things because this is how you're going to make it equitable. You know, we're not looking for equality. We don't want to be equal to you because your equality sucks. Also, it's not equality. And even equity, like to be up to that level, because we would just never get to that level in our relationships, where we would treat them so awful like this. And so it's really, you know, this idea of decolonizing is like, let's literally just change your whole fucking structure, you know? But then I already forgot what the positive, damn it. You get so riled up. Like I go right back to those places of like feeling like our concerns were not valid, were not legitimate, and that we weren't experts of our own experience. Like you're gonna tell me that you know more about an Indigenous anything? Like I'm sure that our BNLs would be like a BNLs every 2 years. It's not that fucking hard. So it's like, it's just being that infantilization too, treated as if we don't know how to organize when we were better organizers to begin with. And also in that I also want to say in that non-transactional sort of visiting, do know that there's a reciprocity that you do want to be bringing, that there is an intention to that visiting. And even when I'm just visiting, like I'm making sure that like, are people fed? Are there these things like in those non-transact, when we're not, like transactions will be made, but not in sort of ways. Like if you're asking something of somebody, you know, it's customary that you bring stuff, you know, but also know who you're talking to. What are their customs? Also just like knowing what people like do if you're going to actually make relationships.
I have
That wasn't even that bad. I could have gone way more.
Yeah.
I have a point to add unless you do, Adrienne.
No, go ahead, Holly.
I was just gonna say with what you were last saying, like around like transactions or more so like offerings, you know, that you give when you meet with someone. I think that's like definitely something as you process through visiting with people, the ways that people are hoping to receive your relationship, I think will start to come out after that first visit. So if this is an Indigenous person you're visiting and, you know, they're an older person than you, being informed with how they have their methodologies, whether through asking in that first engagement, you know, saying, how can I meet you in the most, you know, in the most reciprocal way, you know, at this meeting, rather than, and then applying what methodologies you're familiar with, and then just assuming that the other person is ready to take those on in the same way. I think that's one of the biggest barriers, which is why, you know, people get triggered so consistently. I would openly admit that it's probably twice a week in my day job where I come across interactions which are just like, it's like I felt like, you know, I have a lot to give and I was just spoken over by somebody assuming that their methodologies are the ones that I wanted to use without asking me, how did you plan on, you know, how did you plan on reaching this goal? Or like, because those goals in collaborations will be shared. And so I think it's like speaking on that of like common practice or status quo can be avoided when you ask the person, you know, how can I meet you where you are, or, you know, things like that. And I think that plays to seasons of time that we all talk about as well, that we're all humans, we all go through seasons of struggles and seasons of things like that. And so when we're aware of these things at the beginning of the engagement, you can also understand what capacities you need to build to support them better, rather than them having to fight to fit your supports or get support from you. And so I guess I just wanted to speak onto that as like that further example of how to change your methods that you feel familiar, that you may not even know is offensive. You may not even know is pushing people out of the room. Yeah, really thinking about the word, how to say how to a colleague or to a collaborator, rather than pushing your ideas. And even like silence or, you know, gaps like that in the person not speaking immediately after you've asked something is important to acknowledge as not a lack of capacity or capability, but it's simply the stopping of those, you know, Jordan brought up the nervous system and how our nervous system responds to these things. And there's a lot of unspoken barriers that are being, you know, in those moments of pause, sometimes they're being analyzed or reviewed internally in the brain, even while you're just sitting, talking, having coffee. So just to like acknowledge not to fill up space when there's silence, unless you really feel that you've gotten, you know, to know this person, or you could maybe offer some sort of support to explain or just change conversation. It doesn't, you know, leaving room to guess what might be happening, but still leaving the silence just exist. Yeah. Adrienne, did you want to add anything?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting actually, visiting Montreal right now, and I'm having a lot of memories of being in my undergrad and, you know, being this emerging Indigenous curator. And it's almost like I'm in a space now where I feel very comfortable, but I almost forgot about what a rocky road it was to get here. And
Oh, yeah.
so you know, I just remembered being an intern at a non-Indigenous gallery here in Montreal, and I think they had expected me to be an expert of everything Indigenous, and it's not just for this gallery. I think it's for many experiences that I've had working in the arts. But yeah, for that, it was common practice, like to hire, you know, an intern, and, you know, as like a young Indigenous person, I think for them it was like another box to check. And being the only Indigenous, not even like a hire or permanent hire, but the only Indigenous person at all, already on the bottom of the hierarchy of this gallery, it's like so apparent the lack of Indigenous people in these curator, director, I mean, any of these positions that aren't just admin, you know. And what a lonely experience it was for me, that it really, it certainly set a precedent for a while. And I think they expected me to visit with community members, but also, you know, being an Anishinaabe from the prairies and being in Montreal, it was such a shock that I was learning Haudenosaunee and Kanien'kehá:ka.
Culture shock, man.
Totally, and not being on my ancestral homelands. But I think they just assumed that it was like, okay, well, just go make those connections for us or something. Like it was such a lack of
it wasn't genuine.
It wasn't genuine.
And it's funny because I know that gallery, and they support Indigenous artists. They'll put us in their galleries, but you know, I know who's on the board, and there's like no people of color. There's no people of color even really working it. Maybe it's different now, but it was just like all white Francophone people back in the day that had strong relationships to Indigenous peoples, but and supporting them, but integrally in your governance, there was nothing. So it's just kind of like fake.
So then, like, how do you expect Indigenous people to come into these art spaces when those are your experience for emerging and young people?
Yeah,
that already is a barrier alone, and that had, I think, for me, really made me second guess my participation in the arts. So yeah, and that's for me as someone who is in university and have all these privileges, and I think about folks who don't have that kind of access, you know, and just like how hard it is to actually enter those spaces.
Yeah, and this is like the spaces that we're like leaving for people to be a part of. Like, no, you know, there's a lot to be said and done. There's a lot, like you've seen a lot of that happening here in Montreal, is like, and that's where the Indigenous Curatorial Collective came in multiple times to kind of onboard like galleries to like an Indigenous experience, which feels like so weird. But it's super necessary, because a lot of them foundationally, this is why we need equity policies. This is why we need these policies, because we weren't built in mind at all. So how do we continue that building? Do we unbuild? Do we like build something on top of it? Do we just blow it all up? Like, these are all, there's many different thoughts around this, but I mean, we're pretty much in the belly of the beast, gotta be real. Like, and I love it, because I am corrupting every single student that comes to my class. You know, it's great. It's just like, I get to teach them about me, about what that's the whole thing with professors. It's like I'm like, wow, no wonder they all get like probably drunk with power and stuff. Like, holy shit, you have all these young minds that are listening to you. What a fucking privilege. So I don't take it lightly. But I know that for other people, like, yeah, this is common, this is a job. I'm like, no, this is like such a huge responsibility, you know? So I don't take it like lightly for myself and for those after. Like, I'm always thinking about, okay, this is common practice. Like, even for, say, the PhD comps, I'm already negotiating, changing the comps to be written to be an actual action, like a high camp, like something like that. So that my computation, my understanding and my research and all that is actually animate, it's activity, it's moving, it's living, it's a living document. And how do you talk about something that is living, that it is like a cultural inheritance that exists, but it can't be written about, it has to be, you have to do it. I don't know how else to describe it. I can't write about this stuff because none of my teachers we don't write about it, we do it. You have to do it, you have to feel it, you have to smell it, you have to touch it. It is a thing that is very embodied, which is not the Western Academy at all. It's like, let's all be in here, which is great. I mean, anyways, I could go off forever. We have so many more questions to get through.
Sharing that, I think that just thinking on like what you were last saying, like specifically about like academic institutions and that disconnection for what you actually would need to continue to educate and be informed and, you know, taking the responsibility with like pride and respect and upholding your grievance as disemployment, you know, just thinking about like how to actually translate that in our spaces, like, you know, how can we vocalize needs within institutions? I guess it's like a question that I already have the answer for in my head, but I'm thinking of just like what tools or devices can we use as organizations or institutions to make sure that the artist's needs are met? You know, as simple as like asking maybe in a visiting structure or in a more concrete form, like a contract if you needed, that asks, what are your needs as an artist, or what are your needs as a blank, you know, artist? Because we're assessed on these goals of providing supports for these under-supported artists. Where is our commitment as organizations to give that back to them in a way that is supportive and not extractive? Or, you know, you named, Dayna, early on that going to an event sometimes and just having to go home and like cry or like decompress, like that is really real in so many of these underserved spaces. And like, even when they're good times, sometimes you just need to cry and, you know, feel awkward about it after as part of the process.
You've given so much of your heart and spirit. Sorry, I just
no, that's okay.
Thing where I'm not pausing to give you space to finish what you're saying.
No, that's okay.
Inspired what you're saying, you know. Like, because I sometimes say something, it's gonna leave my brain, you know, which it just did.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. I love the ASL interpretation. Exactly. That's how I feel. Exactly. Oh my God. You know, open a window.
Yeah, here. Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny because Holly, you asked this question when we had I mean, we've been meeting, we've been talking about this, which is already something I so appreciate, is that ongoing commitment to this relationship. So, but yeah, like one of the things I've been thinking about is like, you know, you having these institutional spaces, you know, within the arts to carve our own spaces for, say, even just specific Two-Spirit spaces, and you know, to have opportunities for closed programming, closed events, and meetings, things like that, because the resources are there. And, not all Two-Spirit people feel safe within these white-walled galleries.
Yep.
And then also, I think, acknowledging that we are not monolithic and that we have diverse voices, so not expecting us to be the voice of everything, of everything Indigenous. But I think there's quite a bit of consultation that needs to happen through that, because unfortunately, not all Indigenous people are safe, and not all Two-Spirit people are safe either. And it's understanding the nuance and complexities within communities. So it's kind of that ongoing consultation and community. It's kind of honoring what I think some people might call a gendered, or kind of how do I say this, like what is labeled as gossip or something.
Yeah.
But for us, it's a whisper network that ensures our survival and safety, and that is a valid form of consultation as well. And so,
yeah, my Talton friend Tiffany Creek said, "Gossip saves." Because it is seen as a gendered form of us being able to get together to talk. It dates back to like being in the house and like talking to the other women, because they're all stuck in the house doing all this shit for the man, and then you're talking to each other though. And so like, yes, there is like, we have words for that, like lateral violence and blah blah blah, but like for a lot of us, like definitely I would say, like from my experience, that the gossiping, that there has been many times when it's been the meaning of whether or not you get like assaulted or not, because there are people that are like that and if we're not talking about those experiences to each other, because it's not always safe to be able to name them, all of those things, like the implications, we know that there's that disparity in terms of power too, especially if somebody is like lifted up in a way that has any sort of platform or pedestal or following, that if there's anything like that, there's, I don't know.
And I also think about, yes, exactly. And I also think about,
no, I can hear my brain is working.
I'll keep you on track, Dayna.
Thank you.
I also think about accessibility. I think about accessibility as like Indigenous people do, to make these spaces welcoming for folks who maybe don't feel comfortable going into the galleries. And I also think about accessibility, like physically accessible. I think about, be mindful of ableism that's constantly practiced and normalized within like institutions. And also like accessibility, like financially, I think, or like properly compensating elders on time, right? We're talking about this, like making that payment right away.
Yeah, institutions suck. Like they're like, well, what if the elders don't show up or whatever? And it's just like, no, pay them the day of, or even we pay them the day before. Also, if your relationship is actually like good and trusting, they're not going to do that shit to you. You know what I mean? Or if they do, like there's reasons. It's called obstacles. You don't want to just assume that they're just like not there because they didn't prioritize your event or whatever in the grand scheme of things, Like I've had many different people have to cancel on me last minute because like, their daughter didn't have someone to babysit their grandchild and stuff like that. And so where's the childcare at the event then? Why are we then making it so that like parents or other people with children can't be there? Like and not to say the children are obstacles also, but I mean, raising our young ones like is a community thing too. And in fact, I bring it. There's so much space, like the art institutions being like, this is not a place for like the young minds is like the opposite, because in fact, we want them to see this work because then they can internalize it and give us something fucking new that we never even thought we needed, as every generation fucking does, unless we listen to them. But it's always that And that's what we tell, like the old people talking to the young people and the young people talking to the older people, you know, those two generations actually have so much in common. They are the closest to spirit worlds and they have so much wisdom. The child has so much wisdom of not being like, of being innocent, of not being like clogged up with and fogged up with all of this shit. And the older person has all that wisdom because of all that fucking shit and everything that they've lived through. So that kind of passing forward, we don't sometimes put priority on that or keep the young ones out of those spaces because we feel like they're going to be a nuisance, they're a bother, they're too loud, they're too this and that. And even for myself, yeah, just even being at these events and stuff, I can't stay still. Look at me, I'm tangenting 500 times as we talk about this, you know, and you know, so you can imagine my my report cards always says has trouble with focusing, but it's like I'm in this environment where I'm like looking at something, I can't move and I have to like dictate and regurgitate these things. And like, to me, that's never how I've learned. It's always been the places I've thrived is the art room, when I would get sent to classes, when they saw something, they saw that creativity and they poured something on that rather than being like, that's not going to get you a job, all these sort of things. So it's really about that support and who gets it and who doesn't.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of makes me think about like flexibility when it comes to deadlines.
Yes.
Especially for Indigenous artists, and like both Dayna and I have ADD. I took my meds today.
Mine's mild. Apparently I can't blame all my stuff on it anymore because I'm mildly ADHD. It's just called working on yourself, I guess. Damn it.
But there is a flexibility when it comes to,
yeah.
Because I mean, also for Indigenous folks, like we're all traumatized. You know, it's like how do we participate in a system when we're literally just surviving every day?
Mm-hmm.
So I love this idea of being open to flexibility. I think in terms of programming, in terms of timelines. My God, my voice.
No, more than one. Honestly, give me a timeline 2 weeks before the actual deadline. Like trick me. I don't know. If you really want your deadline, then get to know who you're working with too. It's because I don't know, and there's always, I don't know, I really struggle with it because there's this idea of professionalization, like to be professional, and we want people to be reliable. I think that's part of it, is like how we're able to show up to those relationships and how to be, that reliability is really hard when you're struggling to do other sort of things or get certain needs met, or that maybe if you when we're talking about ableism, how much actual energy you have, like, you know, as able people, we have the maximum. So just think about somebody that has like half of that, a quarter of that. So imagine what you would do if you could only have a quarter of that, and just like putting ourselves in those positions where we can, understand that a bit better in those realities.
And I guess there's like one other thing I wanted to touch on, because you mentioned intergenerational, or like that children and young folks aren't often validated within the institution. Yeah. But there's one thing we're also witnessing within Canada, and within a lot of Canada arts kind of funding, is that there's this immediacy to then hire more Indigenous folks, and I think that's fantastic. I think it's like really wonderful that we're being invited, I guess. I can't believe I'm saying that, invited into these spaces, but we're forced. Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah. But I guess I think about how there are a lot of younger folks coming into these roles and without support. And so I think a lot of young people are being put into these like high functioning roles without any sort of support. And I know, Holly, I think you mentioned like institutional memory, and that these roles didn't even exist for us. So then there's this expectation for us to know exactly what we're doing
and to perform them as such.
Yeah.
Like we have an idea of how this role should be performed, and then the institution has an idea of how the role should be performed. And I don't think those two align. Especially when you're bringing in if you're bringing in that idea. And I say, like, a lot of our art elders are burnt out. Like the system like all that path, they made such a beautiful pathway for us. They really did. And I want to honor that, because there's so many, like, I can't even imagine like even like some of our aunties and all that, what they kind of went through in order for us to be able to be in these positions, to even be mentored by some of them, and that they really fought for that inclusion. But unfortunately, to be included doesn't mean that that we're accepted in the whole. You know, we're a part of that, but we're not integrated in it. Our worldviews are not centered at all there. We're just we're kind of trying to like patch whatever sort of like whatever they're missing. We're supposed to fill that, which is ridiculous, especially when the whole organization, like how many people are in different arts councils, are, you know, different organizations, galleries, how many employees are there actually, and then what is your actual makeup and your percentage. And we talk about this all the time, but you know, these policies don't really mean anything if we're not actually enacting them. Like, just because you have a policy, it's almost like you give yourself a pat on the back, you know. But like, I'm on a board right now, and we're like our advisory committee, and we're about to like resign because we do not want to sign off on this equity policy that's coming through, for instance. I don't know if I'm allowed, whatever. I'm on a lot of different ones. You can figure it out, whatever, but either, or don't figure it out so you don't get me in trouble. Because apparently you're not supposed to talk about this stuff. But this is part of it, is you're not supposed to talk about this stuff. But they don't want the equity. This, like, I learned that like we get 1% of the full budget of this art organization for Indigenous peoples, and this is like 1%. It's like, what? Yeah. I'll give you some crazy, like the number is like, say 20, you get 20, your budget's 20 million, but you get like 250,000 out of that 20 million budget. And that's supposed to fill up all that need and that support and stuff like that, you know? So when you think about even just that financial support, like people are just still going to be left behind. You're not even accelerating it. There's a thing called inflation. We all experience it, except there seems to be, you know, it's really hard to even ask. The fact that we even have to ask for money, we have to beg for $100,000. Like, it's just so dehumanizing and humiliating, honestly, that we have, like, you know, and a lot of these organizations are totally fine with this. They want to take out words like two-spirit, like women, like all these things. One of the organization want to take out the word Anglophone. Okay. Like, and so then you think about, and don't even get me started on the Métis politics out here in Quebec. Like, we're not even, our federation is not even recognized, you know, because they have it's all tied to politics. A lot of these organizations will look at the federal, the municipal, and the provincial politics that are going on, and will be like, we can't do anything about that. Currently, the provincial government is taking Métis people to court, so the fake ones, the fake Eastern Métis ones. But you, as a living person and all that, we can't fund you because you don't fit in our thing of what's it called? Like our definition of Métis. You don't actually exist, is what it says. Oh, I could go off on that one, being here for so long.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a lot of bad experiences there. From them being called late at night, being like, so you're Métis, so you're not, we said First Nations and Inuit, but we didn't say Métis, unfortunately. So we're going to move you from the Indigenous funding to the normal funding. But you'll still be, an advisor will still look at your stuff. An Indigenous advisor will still look at your stuff, you know, and that'll be fine. And I was like, wow, for me, that's based on principle. Like, okay, great, you're going to give me, I would win it either, like, sure, I could go to either category, I'll win it either way because my project's that good. Great, fine. But on principle, and then I'm on your website. Oh, yeah. And also I was on their website on like advertising the Indigenous grants. I was on the website. Ew. Oh, it gets worse. It gets worse. And then they're like, let's have a meeting, and then silence. They're like, we're going to meet with everyone, and then silence. So this is kind of like what a lot of us already are dealing with. And that's like, that's a true, real experience that, you know, that it's not just because of, you know, just because of this one-off, that you could say that towards a lot of other things.
Thanks for sharing, Dayna. I do know we're at our break time. Sorry to not be able to comment on that more right now. Yeah, I just see Em's comment. We have some room after. Yeah, to ask questions, but maybe I'll just throw it back to Em to direct.
Yeah. Yeah, let's take, I know we're kind of scheduled to go until 3 here, so I think let's take 10 minutes for a little break here and give ourselves some time. And then we'll meet back here at 2:40, and then we'll have some time for some question and answer period. And then, yeah, like I just put in the chat there, we'll be able to leave the Zoom room open for a bit if folks wanna stick around and visit for a while. Holly, I kind of just wanted to check in with you to see, did you, we cut off a bit abruptly there just because I wanted to give folks a chance to have a break. But is there anything, kind of before we move into the Q&A session, is there anything that you'd like to continue on with, or anything that you didn't really get to touch on that you'd like to?
I don't think so, other than if people felt they would like some sort of summary of takeaways. Like a few things that I named as actions. Otherwise, if people feel like their notes are comfortable, and Dayna and Adrienne, you don't have any follow-up, I'd be happy to move to questions. You good?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great. Quick nod or shake of summary. Otherwise, I'll move to questions. Yes, I can circulate the UNDRIP, if that's what you're referencing. Yes, I'll share it in just a moment. But I did have a question submitted to me while we were discussing that I'd like to bring up. I don't know exactly what language to use to ask this, so bear with me, but the question was I was seeking out, and if Dayna or Adrienne, if you're not comfortable offering this, or this is something that you'd offer at another time, totally fair. But on ways to approach in a respectful dialogue to support folks with maybe safety concerns, or in thinking about event planning, if you have any, approaches. So before I was saying asking things like how can offer that opening of support for language. Is there any language you would feel might be an offering for a respectful, approach into that conversation before it happens, while not trying to name or trigger an individual? Does that make sense? Can I elaborate?
I'm confused. You go.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's a really good question. When it comes to approaching, I don't want to say people unsafe folks, because I feel like it kind of paints somebody as there could have been situations, and I guess that's one thing too, is there's so much room for nuance, and I guess I'm just thinking about the Two-Spirit community too, and just how traumatized we are, or many of us are.
Yeah.
And how to move tactfully when somebody has caused harm. And so I think it is important to, as my voice cracks, I think it's important to have a conversation, to kind of call this person in. Yeah. And I think it requires more than one person. I think it's kind of a community effort. I think that if there's space and room for ceremony in that as well, I think that's certainly something that would be helpful. Also, a neutral person to moderate, moderate, yeah, or
it might
mediate.
Sorry,
mediation is necessary, or
mediation for sure. When mediation 100%.
Yeah. Well,
even if it's good,
right. But even, or sometimes the victim might not want to be.
Oh yeah.
But
mediation. That's true. That's true. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's totally it. But I mean, I guess it's such a complicated question because the situations can vary so much, and right. So yeah, I guess that's kind of my generalized statement.
I feel like I missed a little bit of language in how I was describing it. although that was really helpful just to hear talk about like a solution being like a mediator. I think the question was a little bit more directed around shaping an event, you know, thinking about what safety kind of security things you can do, but more so of like, how would you go by approaching, you know, maybe a group of people that you're unfamiliar with? You may not know what the harms or concerns are, but you know that they are, you know, maybe susceptible to their event receiving harm because of, you know, they're categorized in this space, kind of.
Yeah, as an organizer, I mean, we get lots of, as if you're organizing any event, you will probably receive some sort of message or an email or something about somebody that has caused harm in the community, and then you know, and then what do you do from there? Like if you're wanting to talk to somebody about it. But I think, I don't know, for myself, because I like these a lot of these processes take a long time, so people have to be knowing that it may take years. Actually, accountability takes a long freaking time, and your accountability ask may be one of the first that they're experiencing. It may not be one of the last. Also, just to, you know, to say that it's like it could be ongoing, that people are people. I don't know. And you just never know quite where it's going to go in terms of that mediation. But to know simple things like being educated around like how to do, like people looked into transformative like you know, tactics, transformative, what is it? Justice and like things like that. Like, I mean, it's interesting because like working with the MMIW when I was part of Missing Justice, which was supposed to be a solidarity group for MMIW GT2S, murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, trans, and two-spirit people. There's definitely like a lot of different asks that would come in terms of like harmful people, or like how do you navigate all these different dynamics. And even in the activism community, like certain, like it's even main people that we really look up to too. There's a lot of different stuff that can follow, or that even when you're a public person. But I don't want to diverge from that. Just to say, to pull it back in, is like, you know, we would always go with a mediator, somebody that was outside of it. We always made sure that the people that were being called in, if that's what we were choosing to do, to call in rather than call out, we wanted to meet with people. Like it'd be like one person versus all these organizations, right? So that, or whoever's showing up to the table, there needs to be somebody else for that person too, so that they can feel comfortable, because nobody's going to talk to you if it's like one versus whatever, you know. And just those, I know it feels weird, but like you want to make that container like a safe, like a comfortable place where you can talk about uncomfortable things. You know, you're not going to be able to talk about these tensions or that. And in fact, the person that has caused the harm, like, or whatever we say, the harm causer or whatever, the one that is being called into question, whatever that may be. Yeah, it's just like, oh, what was I trying to say with that? Oh, I've just done this. It's a really difficult process ultimately. And like, I mean, I've had to ask to remove people. Like if people bring stuff to me, I've had to ask them to be removed. But in that way, I'm always thinking about kindness, no matter what that, you know, whatever, even if that person is malintended, I'm going to react with that kindness to ask them to leave. That, like, you know, and those sort of things. As an organizer, it's something that you have to get really good at, because we're talking about relationships and relations, there's going to be conflict, and there's going to be different levels of conflict too. You know, it's not all the same. But like for me as an organizer, that's why I want to have peer support there. Like also peer support is really interesting. And I see this a lot in like community organized, more like activism rather than arts, you know, but that idea, like, in activism, we do try to build in that care, even though it tends to be the positions where you see the most burnout, is people just like fighting for this cause. And because the causes are endless, it's continuous. If there's oppression, there will be somebody fighting against it, right? So that to maintain yourself and not to get sucked into that stuff too, because the calling in can be a lot too. I don't know, there's a lot to unpack with that one. because somebody else's harm isn't inherently affecting me, but I have to be responsible for those people when people come into a space. You have to, as an organizer, you want to vouch for everybody too, because that's who's going to be coming to when people are upset, they're going to be coming to you. Why was this person here? What were the steps that were taken? Da 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 da. And even in your own personal life, I think you can be the same way. I don't know. It's not perfect, and I've definitely feels like it's done right, and it's definitely gone wrong multiple times. It's people in tension and conflict, and sometimes it's really hard communicating through that. But it is still really important to do so.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say, like, really briefly, is that, you know, it's like we have these ideas of how things will go and how to mediate, and like I mean, I don't want to say like a romanticized idea of what conflict could look like.
Yeah, it is.
It's
It's romantic.
But then there's another part of me that I was just thinking, or you just get somebody's mean auntie to kick them out. Like, that's just kind of how it goes. And I remember once at an event, like there was somebody, a creepy white man, who was there, and I wasn't like, he was just, there was something that I guess like had happened early. Anyway, I told Dayna, no problem. Booted, like, you know what I mean? And sometimes, unfortunately, it's like we talk about, or sometimes
this person, and this person was a pretendian, and was a person that was queer, that really identified with Two-Spirit people, but unfortunately just didn't see how that they're not included in that. And it was just like they wanted to help set up, but then they wanted to stick around and linger around. And I'm like, no, unfortunately, this is a space that is meant for that. And like, just based off of like what our relationship is and what you've told me, and then also how it's more of actions, honestly. For me, it's like not so much the character, but what is your actions? Because you could be a good person, but if you are treating people like shit in community, or if you're letting those sort of things, like if you're anyways, it's just like, I don't know, it's you know what I mean? It's just something you have to learn how to do, is to let people know that they're just like not also welcome in certain places based on their actions. And then that could be further discussed later on, but that is still like a lot of time and energy being put on the individuals to like hold somebody accountable. So there's like, it's that investment that you want to make in terms of that and what that looks like.
Yeah, it sounds like, sorry.
No, go ahead, Holly, go ahead. No, it's fine.
In what you were saying sounds also to what Taryn in the chat was kind of recognizing, or listening from the conversation.
Yeah.
That contracts like really have nothing to do with humanness, and the care that you as a human in your role like, you know, should be offering or should be thinking about when you're at your employment. You're not employed to be, you know, extra human that comes with your employment. That also, like, just thinking about our conversations around methodologies and how to make it through these spaces. And it just feels, for me, it's a continual practice of just visiting, knowing each other, and knowing that conflicts are better resolved when you know each other, when you trust each other. Because if someone's feeling that they're being, you know, kind of left out of something, but they don't even know who this person is, it does sting more. But when you know someone who's like you trust them, they trust you, you have that relationship, and they've gone and done something that feels conflicting for you, I think it's easier to name and vocalize, or at least understand that the other person, you know, may have not even recognized it as you know, a misstep or whatever. And that conversation for, you know, restorative justice, you said, that's when it happens. And it's like, you know, if we're collaborating with that human kindness, and I just named a few things you were talking about when you're talking about tools or like ways of processing. So that relational time, the distance you've had of knowing each other or knowing of each other, the mediators, so that support system when you're facing, you know, conflict, because it's not easy for anyone, I think, to feel like you're in conflict or you're entering a room of conflict. So that mediator is a great tool to take with you. as well as ceremony. I felt like as soon as you said that, I was like, duh, I didn't write that down. But thinking about like ceremony being as however it is between the two people, you know, I think just to give everyone like some perspective, like I think when we're saying ceremony, we're not saying, you know, go to sweat every time you want to do this, or go to ceremonies that are existing in traditional forms, but that you can have ceremonies that develop between your relationships, or sometimes ceremony through the exchange. You know, if you're giving someone a piece of tobacco for their asking them something and just the hopes that something will develop, that's ceremony. And so that's a tool for engaging in a way that somebody's understanding that you're coming to them, you know, with this methodology that's existed in a lot of Indigenous people's families, you know, for many, many years. For ceremony, another example, in addition to tobacco, it might be like, if you're familiar with wampum belts. Wampum belts were that, you know, device to symbolize this treaty and this agreement, but it was the Indigenous side of it, not the treaty side of this, you know, paper form document that no one understood. That's a form of ceremony. You could literally collaborate on a piece of art if you wanted to, on a really elaborate doodle on a sketch like sticky pad, give it to this person, you know, and put that intention of what this gathering is, because that's being contemporary, that's, you know, using the practices that have existed in the past and bringing them forward in a way that feels familial or familiar, because of, and specifically in engagements with Indigenous people. And I don't think it's to like put fun and say like, here's my ceremonial sticky note. That's not what I'm trying to give off. It's more so like taking that time that when we say ceremony, coming together with intentions that are like, you know, benefiting this bigger picture, this world value kind of thing, or large values. Yeah, I lost my train of thought after that. But,
well, fun fact, since we're in Haudenosaunee territory, because you brought up the wampum, and I just actually learned this this morning. Well, not just I learned this, but I already knew this. But if for those of you that don't know, because there is agreements out here with the wampum, mostly with the Dutch and the Haudenosaunee or the Mohawk. But Dutch, I can filter through any type of settler that kind of fits in there, any type of English, French, whoever. But then you have like the two colors. So I don't know if any of you have ever seen the wampum belt, especially the 2-row wampum. Sorry, there's many different wampum belts. What I'm speaking about is the 2-row wampum, because the 2-row wampum is was a treaty between the Mohawk and the Dutch. And what it said is, it's like these two parallel lines that run across, and their wampum is that beautiful purple shell. And so it's done with that beautiful purple shell, these two purple lines, and one is the Dutch and one is the Haudenosaunee, and they're never to meet. They're always in the wampum. They're never crossing. It's always parallel to each other, which means that there's no, there's supposed to be a non-interference. You have your ways, we have ours, and they're not supposed to interfere. We don't tell you what to do, you don't tell us what to do. And then not only those two agreements, then it's also, because of course we have to be extra, when you see the 2-row wampum, there's actually a white, there's like white, and then the row, and then white, and then the row, and then white. So there's these 3 white strips that are kind of enveloped in the 2-row wampum, and that is part of its friendship, peace, and respect. Those were the 3 teachings. Those are the 3 teachings that they had in the wampum of how we're going to like have a successful community, and a successful coexistence is through friendship, is through peace. And it's not even like, it's like the peace of a good mind. It's like that good, when they say peace, they mean like that every decision you made is with the idea of peace in mind. So like that it's a good thing that's coming out of it, that your mind, so we always say our minds is one, because it's really about a whole collective. And it's so incredible being out here in this territory as an uninvited guest. And I say uninvited because the university invited me. The Haudenosaunee didn't invite me. The Mohawks didn't invite me to come out here. the university did. But my responsibility as a Métis person from Treaty 1 territory is to go wherever I go, is to know whose land am I on, and how do I pay respects as an uninvited guest. And for me, it's like building community and wanting that. Oh yeah, and the last one was respect. But of course, you know, it used to be power. It was like friendship, power, and righteousness. But that feels like very what was it? I always say it's like that feels like the very Mohawk man. There's like that's a Mohawk man out here. Righteousness, but that's like the respect. So they had to kind of switch it up because, you know, power. This idea of power is so different. Like power to me is so different than a non-native person. Our concepts of that, even capitalist power. So, anyways, that's just to say is it kind of actually is very relatable to all the things that we're talking about in terms of what we talked about, which is the friendship, peace, and respect of what we want in our relations, in our good relations, that we have respect for each other, that our intentions are good minds, like only want to share peace with each other, and that we're building our relationship and our friendship in that.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah. Well, you know, we talk a lot about, we're from the land of the treaties, right? Prairie, you got Treaty 1, Treaty 4, Treaty 2, Treaty 6, Treaty 9, Treaty. I mean, just like, it'd be like an auction house. Treaty 1, Treaty 1, Treaty 1, Treaty 2, Treaty 2, Treaty 3. And actually, recently I found out that some of my ancestors were some of the first signers of Treaty 1. So it's really important. When I came out here as a person from treaty territory, this is unceded land. So, and it's really interesting that the coast seems to be unceded, like so-called Vancouver Island is unceded territory, which means that, you know, they don't actually have any treaties between the governments. It was like wampum belts. It was those type of agreements, or they have the Great Law of Peace, but that's something that's also from them. It's not something that's shared with like the settlers or non-natives. So it's really, yeah, it's very interesting, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a Mohawk or two may have rubbed off on me while I'm here. So I know a thing or two now.
Thank you so much for sharing. We're pretty wrapped up for 3 o'clock, so I don't know about questions, but maybe that's something that we can just start throwing in the chat. And if you want to,
I'm open because we talked a lot.
Yeah, or even our emails, we could throw them in the chat too. Folks want to contact us.
Great. I'll hand it off to but just again,
And pastries. Uh-huh.
Absolutely no need to rush off. You know, but kind of before everybody does, or the folks that need to leave do, just want to really say my heartfelt thanks to everyone today, to all the presenters, folks from this morning, and also to Holly and Dayna and Adrienne. It was such a great afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Thank you for all the folks that came today to sit on Zoom for a day. I know that's not a small feat to ask, and I appreciate everyone being here. Thank you so much to Barb and Sue for their interpretation skills so that this event and recording can be accessible to those who need it. And yeah, we can leave the room open for a bit. I'll probably stop the record. I'll stop the recording now. And if people want to hang out and chat and whatever, that's totally cool. Thank you.